Good morning. Good morning. Bridgeport Christian Church. I want to congratulate you on 175 years of faithfulness. That's really something. Isn't it? I mean, I look out over the congregation and I'm pretty sure most of you weren't even here when they founded this church. But that means that you are the heirs of something significant. You have been handed a legacy of faithfulness from people who've gone before you. And that places upon you a great responsibility to hand on a legacy to those who come behind you. I want to say thanks to Ted Sloan for inviting me, for being the person who invited me, for the kind introduction. I want to say thanks to the Reverend Ann Shepard. You, it seems to me, are in good hands. Well, you can say that. You can say that. And I'm honored to be here. In fact, our congregation, Douglas Boulevard Christian Church, is celebrating its 175th anniversary this year, too. You know how I know that? I was getting ready to tell the operations manager that I was going to be gone today. And I thought, I think we're having a 175th anniversary sometime soon. And so on October 13th, when I went to tell her, I said, I'm just going to look at the history book. And so apparently on October 12th, 1846, they founded a church in Louisville, Kentucky. And if Douglas had a real minister like y'all do, they'd have known about it a lot earlier than they're going to find out. So congratulations on that. Now, I'm proud to be here with my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Donald Gillette, my friend. Our region's extraordinarily fortunate to have him in this place of leadership. Amen. When I was in seminary, Lexington Theological Seminary, there was an annual rite that took place among those lucky folks about to graduate. Now, the president of Lexington Theological Seminary is here, Dr. Sharice Gillette, and I know that the seminarians are much more mature and couth than we were a long time ago. But we had this sort of annual rite where we'd kind of get together and we would compare calls. And somebody'd say, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm going down to First Christian so-and-so. And how about you?" "Well, I'm taking that associate job way out there in California." And it was a big deal. Well, what kind of package are they offering down at First Christian Hog Leg, Tennessee anyways? They'd say, "Well, it's not bad. They got a parsonage. My salary's not that great, but I got a book allowance." And you say, "Well, yeah, but what's the total package?" And they'd say, "Well, it's such and such." And if you had a bigger salary package, you'd say, "Well, that's great." But inside, you'd be thinking to yourself, "Man, I'm sure glad I wasn't home when First Christian Hog Leg, Tennessee called." I was one of those lucky folks who got a really good call right off the bat, down in the heart of Appalachia, at First Christian Church, Middlesboro, Kentucky. Right there in the Cumberland Gap. They're going to pay me well. They're going to set us up in a parsonage. They're going to give me a book allowance, the whole 9 yards. They even sent down pictures. The church was beautiful. And the parsonage had 3 bedrooms and a big yard. But the best part of all of it was they sent this picture off the front porch overlooking the 4th tee at the country club right across the street. And this wasn't any country club either. This was the oldest continuously played golf course in America. I know that because there was a sign at the end of our street that said, oldest continuously played golf course in America. And I was proud. I brought those pictures to school. So when we played that "How Big Is Your Salary Package" thing, I could whip those pictures out and throw them down like a royal flush. So when we started playing this little game, I was ready with my pictures. And it came to my friend Marcus, and we asked, "Hey, Marcus, where are you going? How much are they paying?" All the same stuff. And Marcus, who is a friend and a fine black minister to this day, said, I haven't gotten anything quite yet. He said, there are a whole lot of African-American disciples churches to choose from. Well, I felt really bad for Marcus because, he's really a great person and a fine preacher. And I knew that at some point he was going to find something big. When it came around to me and we went through this whole thing, and so when they got to the question about how much I was going to make, and I didn't hem and haw, and I just came right out with it. I'm going to get paid such and such. And there's some low whistles. I was proud that I inspired a little good-natured jealousy in my colleagues, right? So for the coup de grace, I threw down those pictures and I said, look at that. That is where we're going to be living. And that right there, that's the oldest continuously played golf course in America. Right across the street. You can walk on the fourth tee. And the chairman of the search committee told me that if the first year goes well, like they think, then the church is going to buy me a membership. Man, I couldn't fight any longer. I had this big grin on my face. And I looked over at Marcus, and he wasn't smiling. And I thought, well, that's probably just sour grapes. Just so smug. And Marcus looked at me and he said, man, that's great. You'll do well. But one thing's bothering me. If I come down there to visit you and you say, Marcus, let's go over to that country club. I want to show you around. And I say, all right, well, then let's go. Let me ask you something. Are they going to let me play golf there? And my big grin just sort of shriveled up. Like a stray grape that gets left in the ashtray in the car in the middle of July. Just turned sour and bad. And I felt horrible. That's good for you, but what about me? That was Marcus's real question, right? That's good for you, but what about me? The church can say all kinds of beautiful things. It can build beautiful buildings, play beautiful music, pack the people into the pews, get itself on radio, TV. But let me ask you something. If the church can't answer that question, if the church can't be moved by the stories of those just scraping to get a foothold in a world that's built for everybody but them, if it can't do that, then it's not the church. That's a good thing for you, but what about me? See, that's at the heart of our gospel this morning. Now, what's been going on as we come to this text, which seems really, admittedly, like a weird text for 175th anniversary, doesn't it? It's actually the lectionary text for this day. I said, well, let's see what we can do with it. Back in chapter 11, we're told that Jesus and the disciples who've been on their way to Jerusalem for some time now, they finally arrive. And Jesus rides into town on the back of a donkey on Palm Sunday. You remember that, right? And after he wakes up the next day, he heads right down to the temple. Now, what's the first thing that Jesus does when he gets there? Anybody remember? He starts turning over the tables of the money changers, calls everybody in charge a bunch of robbers. And as you might guess, that didn't endear him to the local religious fat cats. And so Jesus, as was his custom, didn't waste any time rubbing the movers and the shakers the wrong way. The chief priests and the scribes had such a bad taste in their mouth from the whole money changer thing that they started plotting ways to kill him, according to Mark. And so Jesus left the temple. But not long afterwards, Jesus coming back to the temple. And on the way there, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, they approached him. And they asked him, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you the authority to do them? Where do you get off? Now, what happens next in the Gospel of Mark, for the better part of a chapter and a half, Jesus and the temple big shots go at it hammer and tong. Jesus calls them illegitimate leaders, and they try to trap him into saying something inflammatory enough to get him killed. This is a lot of back and forth. Let's just be honest, a lot of testosterone. And we've read the ending, so we know that they're playing a game with deadly stakes. And immediately after stepping outside, one of his disciples observes that the temple is built with large stones. To which Jesus replies, you see all these buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down. And then he launches into this extended discourse about what's going to happen after he dies and is raised from the dead. And this is where we pick up our text for this morning. Now let's take a look at what Mark's doing here. And Jesus finally gets to Jerusalem. All of Mark's readers, those who know the story and how it'll end, they expect Jesus to meet his untimely demise. That's where this is all headed. And he goes immediately to the temple, not unlike the babysitter in a horror movie who just has to go down into the cellar after the power goes inexplicably off. Now, while there, a variety of the keepers of the keys to the temple, they try to trip him up. Why do you think that is? Why do these religious types have it in for Jesus? Well, think about it for a minute. If Jesus is the Messiah, then current power arrangements are going to be disrupted. There's a new sheriff in town. All of which would be one thing if what he was there to do was to kick out the Roman army from Palestine and underwrite the religious leaders' present claims to privilege, as his followers almost unanimously expected. But as it is, Jesus is in the business of knocking over lemonade stands, disrupting systems meant to maintain the power and wealth of a few at the expense of the many. So Jesus says, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes. And to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, to have the best seats in the synagogues, places of honor, banquets. They devour widows' houses. And for the sake of appearance, they say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Now, having said that, Jesus launches into an observation about a widow at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, giving what she doesn't have so that God's work can continue. Having her house devoured by some of the very people who are busy trying to trip Jesus up. The people God has put there specifically to watch out for the most vulnerable. You see the irony here, right? But see, right here is where the church has often gotten it so wrong. It has encouraged people to read themselves into the story on the part of the widow as an exhortation to Christians to be more like her, to be ready to give, and then give some more. You too could be righteous. Just take out your checkbook and give. Give until it feels good. This is a limited time offer. Call now. Operators are standing by. Offer not valid in Nebraska or California. And while I consider sacrificial giving an honorable act, I think that's only a secondary point here. See, because given the way that Mark sets this story up, I think he has his sights set a bit higher on the socioeconomic ladder. Now, I got a question for you. What if this story isn't about the widow at all? What if this story is a scathing critique of a system that grinds the last $5 from a woman who's trying to figure out if the 3 cans of sardines she keeps at the bottom of her purse will be enough to get her through till the next month? What if this is a story about an economic system that manipulates the poor and devours widows' houses? An economic system that's not only not challenged by God's people, but depends on the cover given by God's people to remain in existence. What if the point Jesus is making isn't be more like the widow? What if the point he's making is, if you're going to be faithful to the God of the poor and the weak, you can't spend your time propping up systems that hungrily seek the last pennies of those who can least afford to part with them. In other words, perhaps Jesus' scorn is aimed not just at the fact that often the wealthy contribute relatively little as a percentage of what they own compared to the poor, but that the wealthy and the powerful help to perpetuate a structure that leaves the poor and the powerless feeling like they have to surrender every last cent in order to be full participants. Making those at the bottom feel less than human, so they'll cough up just a bit more to keep those at the top from having to sacrifice anymore. That's an abomination to Jesus. In fact, read this way, the next 2 verses about the destruction of the temple suggest not just some prophecy about the devastation of Jerusalem in 70 CE or a supersessionist end to traditional Judaism where Christianity prevails over its older Jewish sibling, or even an oblique reference to the resurrection. But instead, perhaps it's a commentary on how the current system of power arrangements that revolves around a structure that pressures the poor to sacrifice even more of what they don't have in order to be considered participants. That structure will be overthrown in the coming reign of God. Maybe that's what Jesus is getting at. So what, you may ask? What does that mean for us? What if, after all we do to change the system, and what if that widow, she comes and she still gives us her last little bit? What do we do with that? I mean, what responsibility does that place on us? A friend of mine called me one time, a treasurer from prison ministry. And my friend said, "Derek, I got a problem." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, there's this guy who sends a check every week for $12 to $15. Like clockwork." And I said, "Well, why is that a problem?" He said, "Well, the thing is, the guy's an inmate. And I know he only makes 50 cents an hour. He's sending in just about everything he has." And I said, "Wow." He said, "Yeah, wow. But here's the problem. Look, I love the work we do, but we're sure not worth that." And I want to tell him, "Look, you need to keep that money. We're not worth giving everything you have to give." But then I think, I can't do that. I can't tell this guy what to do with his money. It would sound too much like I thought his money wasn't good enough for us. I just don't know what to do. And I said, "Well, yeah, that does sound pretty sticky. What are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know. Only thing I can think of is that we better get busy so that one day maybe we can be the church that's worth what this guy has given us." Maybe one of these days, if we work hard enough, we'll be a church worth what this guy is laying down for us. See, we can't control what people do with their money. What are we supposed to do? 2 things, it seems to me. First, we need to advocate for just economic systems that look out for the needs of those on the margins. A system that refuses to devour widows' houses, that refuses to make the poor feel like they're not full participants until they cough up their last $5 until payday. And second, in the meantime, we need to work like crazy to be a church worthy of the kind of financial sacrifices that people make. Now look, y'all have been a congregation for 175 years now. This church has endured the Civil War, Reconstruction, 2 world wars, the Depression, civil rights, Vietnam, 9/11, and some, shall we say, less than stellar UK football teams. This congregation has seen the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the development of antibiotics and childhood vaccines, the mass production of cars, the dawn of the commercial airline industry, the computer, space travel, the iPhone, and 20 seasons of keeping up with the Kardashians. All of which has called upon this community of faith to react to a changing world, to figure out how to be faithful, to be a place that deserves the kind of investment of trust that is necessary to hang around for nearly 200 years. And a world with microwave ovens and disposable sporks, that means something. Congratulations. I mean, you have a chance to live out the good news that God wants us to live differently. Challenging systems that hound vulnerable women for their last $5 until the next Social Security check comes in. And let me tell you something, with 175 years worth of history, you got a lot of credibility to work with. So the question to Bridgeport Christian Church upon this grand occasion is, what kind of church are you going to be for the next 175 years? How can Bridgeport Christian Church be the kind of community that prioritizes the lives of those the rest of society has been taught to ignore? That live with the pain of those who ask, that's fine for you, but what about me? How are you going to deal with them? Now, a widow gave everything she had, which puts her in the same team with Jesus, it turns out, who after a very full week in Jerusalem ended up giving up everything he had in challenging a system that devours widows' houses and allows the poor and the low-wealth people to think that they can never give quite enough. See, when it's all said and done, I guess our response to all this giving is to work to try to be a presence in an often unjust world, a place worthy of all this trust that's been placed in us, knowing that we never will, but knowing that we can never quit trying. We owe it to those who come to us, who trust us to receive them and their gifts like Jesus did. In fact, I know about a minister, an inmate, and a widow who want to know, who are we going to be? Who are we going to be? What shall I tell them? Amen.